the OPEC meeting of the 24th of February. I'm not aware of any apologies. We haven't heard from Councillor Cook. And a declaration of interest we have this morning, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I just wanted to update the committee. As you're well aware, in my consultancy business, I do a whole bunch of advisory work. I was approached last month to pick up the role of reviewing the Jobs for Nature program by MFE, which I need to obviously declare an interest, which is I'm both the independent member for here and, dare I say, also Blackberry region, both of which are involved with Jobs for Nature. And I inquired of them because they asked me whether I'd do it, about actually that interest and was there a conflict. The nature of the review is one where the money from the central government agency's perspective is largely allocated, and they're looking for a review on a lessons learned. If they had to do this again, would they do it the same way? And that's actually because the role of Jobs for Nature is simply, as you folk well know, find jobs that are sustainable in the environmental outcome space. And obviously with the job numbers not necessarily being so bad, they're starting to wonder what the program is like. So it's primarily a piece of work that I am doing in Wellington. But I think it's fair to say, Lyndall, I need to recognise that I will be coming out. In fact, I will be somewhere, Rob, making a knock on your door and saying, could I just understand what is Environment Southland's experience? So I've discussed that with Doug Leader, who is chair of the reference group, and obviously also who I work with in Bay of Plenty. And they're comfortable, and I'm comfortable that it doesn't represent directly a conflict, but it's an interest I would obviously keen that here in Environment Southland you are aware of. So if I can at least leave that lie on the table. I think I've sent you an email as well, which may be helpful for the record. If I could just leave that as the situation, and we'll have to clarify comments, clarify any of those comments that people would like.
Any follow up on that? Thank you very much, Bruce.
Thank you.
I'm not aware of any public forums, petitions, or deputations. So we'll move straight on to item 5, which is the confirmation of minutes of the 27th of January. Any corrections or amendments to those before we put them? Thank you. Someone like to move those, please? Thanks, Councillor Beard, seconded Councillor McPhail. Any other questions? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. No extraordinary or urgent business, no questions, and as far as I'm aware, no councillors' reports. Excellent. Let's move straight into the General Manager's reports. Item 1. Do you want to introduce that, or should we just go straight to Tony?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tony. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I will just take you briefly through the high points, given that it is quarterly now, and we did say that we would perhaps delve a little bit deeper into it, so I'm also open to questions. But, so let's go through the 6 monthly results for Environment Southland and look at the forecast. This is our first forecast till the end of the year.
Tony, can I just clarify whether you would like questions as we go through, or whether you'd like them at
Probably at the end, Chair, if we could.
Sure.
Actually, shall we do it page by page, because that allows people we can sign off as we go through.
Yep, that suits me. Yep.
Page 12, revenue and expense statement. If we focus on the operating surplus and deficit for the 6 months, 1.3 million versus a budget of 3.2, a near $2 million favourable variance, comprised of half actually savings in expenses and some additional income. If we look ahead to the forecast to the end of the year, we expect that we will have, we are forecasting that we will have an operating deficit of 7.5 million versus an operating deficit of 7.8. Now within that, the current savings and the people cost we anticipate will continue at about that level. We do have some vacancies and we're rolling vacancies, to be fair. The contractors and consultants we are predicting there, you can see, to be quite a bit higher than originally budgeted, and I'll come back to that. And the operational costs at this point are reflecting timing issues around just work being done, and we anticipate they will come in at budget. The rates, of course, we hope will always be on budget, and other income, we believe that the current variance will continue as is. The current variance in income is a result of compliance revenue and consents revenue ahead of budget, and then some various sundry projects that have come along that were unbudgeted originally. Now, a bit of that income has been offset in this contractors and consultants increases, where we have projected increase in the river works cost of some 300,000 to 400,000 over and above budget, and that's reflecting work that was carried forward from the flood. This is river repairs that weren't completed in last year and are not insurable. That will be funded from the carryovers and reserves of the river areas. The additional work that's going on in compliance and consents that has resulted in the income has resulted in costs, and there's 300,000 sitting there. And the balance is around employees that haven't been replaced, where we're using consultants, for example, in the LTP, planning consultant and an advisory consultant, and some advice to council that we had earlier in the year through TDP. So that is the balance, that's the forecast, and if we look at down the bottom to the investment income, slightly ahead in realised income, which is investment income from dividends and interest at the moment. Expect that to end up on budget. Unrealised income from the portfolio as at the 31st of December was 2.4 million. As at today, it is exactly the same, but we are going up and down between $500,000 and $800,000 a fortnight. We're predicting, it's a guess, 2 million, if and hope it holds. Are there any questions, Chair, on that page?
No, oh yes.
I'm not getting away.
Yeah, so it's too good to be true.
Actually, Tony, can I say well done on the great reporting? I think last time I might have said that's the best report I've seen. I think this is an even better one. So, ironically, the better a report is, the more you generate a couple of questions. The thing that interests me, and I can't help but also draw reference to the LTP item we have coming up, which reflects a number of matters which are not on track. So when I see savings in part being made in people, it raises two questions for me. The primary question is, what aren't we doing? That's why I go to the LTP report and find that things aren't on track. Probably as I expected, but nevertheless, because it's been prefaced before, but things are not on track. And we're stating in those areas that there are staff shortages and COVID impacts and yada, 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 which is understandable, but still real in terms of what has and hasn't been achieved. And also, I think I've heard you say partly that our planned overspend in contractors and consultants is in part compensation for that underspend or the saving. So that's cool, and I understand it. By the way, the second issue that I have around savings on staff is that if we've got permanent savings, does that mean we've got existing staff covering others, and therefore the stress, the health and safety go with it? But that's well, I think it could be a primary issue if you're the staff affected, but in terms of here, it's my secondary issue. So I guess my question is, in light of our not being on track in a number of areas and given rise to a permanent saving in people, really are we comfortable with this financial result, albeit it looks favourable? It may be a question, Tanya, that I need to look more at Rob over, but that's really the question I'd like to ask. Are we happy? Are we happy? We've got a permanent saving, but we're not on track in areas that require staff to deliver.
Madam Chair?
Please.
So some of the areas which we will talk about when we get to the LTP report relate to the slowdown by COVID more than staff. I think the only commentary around staff is in the air plan, which had been an initial slowdown well before any savings in staff had started. That's now primarily driven by the fact that the national environmental standards are not happening. So the biodiversity project, I think, is more to do with our partners. So those are not the drivers for those ambers in the LTP. And I think the thing that we're working through currently in relation to our program of work is exactly that, Bruce, which is that we're looking at what needs to be done at the right timeframes. And it's not necessarily inappropriate that some things are done by externals where the work is periodic. Yeah.
So I think from that, so I mean, obviously, perhaps I haven't been overly clear in my questioning. We've got a beneficial saving of 345. We're prepared to bank that at the moment. Essentially, is what we're saying. We're not going to spend that money. So well done on the forecasting. But when I combine that with your answer, we are comfortable that our work programs are not suffering because of this gain that we're making. In other words, we haven't got staff on board.
It'd be fair to say, I guess we're working hard on that issue.
Yeah.
So just doing a review of areas like coastal planning was previously discussed to look at.
Yeah.
Have we got issues? Have we got issues with shovel ready?
Yeah.
Is that impacting on our work program? So we're actively looking really hard at our operational areas to make sure that actually we've got capacity, that we've got some capacity issues. We're backfilling with consultants, but are there some gaps? And we are looking at taking on more staff in some of those areas to ensure that we can deliver. I'm not sure I'm quite answering your question, but I guess we're focused.
I may have not asked an expert question other than I think I get your point, Rob, that actually
We're very much focused on the challenge of this where we are and an expanding work program that's increasing.
And part of that's shared services looking too. I mean, there's not, as we discussed, last year with TVB, any capacity for us to really be looking at exponential growth forever in that area. So we have to look at how we do our work a lot better. So that's
okay. Look, that's good. I mean, that's thank you. That's got me close to my answer because the 345 or the savings, whatever that might be that we're forecasting, sounds good. Given I take your point, well, with the TDB show, that actually we're in, as Tanya is, significant deficits here in our operations. We don't want to overspend. But equally, if we're suddenly finding favourable variances with staff, and I know we've got the compensation around consultants, it does raise the question, how stressed and are we going to be able to deliver on our program? And I hear what you're saying, that actually you've got a review, if I can call it that, underway to check on delivery at the right time with all the pressures that are coming through in terms of staff and delivery.
And so no formal review, but we're actively looking in a number of areas where the pressures we've got and ensure, do we need to address that? I'll touch on that too in my session later on and around my thinking there around risk.
Right, no, that's good. Tanya, thank you. I told you it was a great report. It's asking reasonable questions, I hope. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. I've got Councillor Beard, followed by Chairman Horrell and Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Chair. So just on the question of understanding operational from operating. So on the expense groupings of this report that we're looking at, people, that's quite clear. Obviously, that's the staff that we employ. Contractors and consultants, that's reasonably clear in my mind as well. And I'm assuming we've got, obviously, for river works, it's contractors. For RMA work, it's contractors, consultants, and so forth. Then the grouping operational. So what are we encompassing? What are we grouping under operational that's different from obviously people we employ and the subcontractors, contractors that
basically all the other costs, and to be fair, that the bulk of that 11 million, 3 to 4 million is actually catchment. So, yeah. After that, I'd be challenged to actually tell you what it is, but it totals up to 11 million. It's effectively everything else, Alan, from telephone to power to our own rates that we pay. So it is substantial.
But as far as catchment work is largely done through contractors.
You've actually highlighted something here that's been analysed incorrectly and put into the contractors bucket. All right, normally contractors is only contractors and consultants for non-physical work. Okay, so in this case, we've highlighted it and put it into the contractors area. It should be in Riverworks, which is in operations.
That was my point. I thought operational would be Riverworks.
And you've just highlighted that, and I apologise. It's a coding thing. As we've analysed, we put out to all the staff, all the managers and the team leaders and budget holders to analyse their own position at the 31st of December and come back with where they're at and where they're going to be at the 31st of June. And then we collate that across a great big matrix and put it together. So in this case, it's come into the wrong place. And well done for picking that up and asking.
Thank you. Chairman Hall?
Yes, just, I'm sure I know the answer to it. Somebody else probably picking it up. Look on page 13 under corporate, we've
Not quite there yet.
Oh, not on that one. Okay. I'll hold fire.
Thank you. Councillor McCallum, moving on swiftly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With the contractors and consultants, are we really narrow? Because we've got an extra cost because we don't have the staff in-house, are we really focused and narrow about what we're actually asking them to do? Because they have a bad habit sometimes of doing more work because they think we might need it, so they do more work and charge more. So I'm really focused about if we're going to go out there and ask somebody to do some work, are we following up and getting the actual work that we perceive, not the work they think we're going to get?
We have fairly robust procurement around contractors and consultants, and it is an emphasis of the CEs to ensure that we get only what we need. So that's all I can suggest in that area. And if we take out the Riverworks, the compliance and consent costs are simply around the work that they need to do to achieve prosecution, to follow through with that. So that's legal in a large degree. And in consents, it's the processing of the consents or advice to the consent team. So it's reasonably routine, but it's just that it's simply larger, of course, than the budget from last year in both cases.
So the answer is yes, following up. But also noting that we're in a business which is quite specialised. You know, for us to employ all of our staff would be significant. We're continually looking at, are we better off to build some capacity or to use a consultant? You know, we use them, you know, in that planning area. We've significant investment there. We've got some specialists there. We are looking longer term. I'm keen that we build more capacity in that area, but that's going to take a bit of time. We need to have the big hitters who can do that job right now. So we are forced to use a consultant. You know, so we are very, as Tanya talked about, quite considered about our decision making in this space. You know, yeah.
That's what I was hoping you would say, Rob.
Thanks. We'll move on to the next page. Thanks, Tony.
Page 13, this is an analysis of the same information into our groups of activities. So it allows us to see our investment, our income and our investment in each of these areas. Just to help you with the reference and understanding of these, when we get to page 19, these same areas are detailed and the same numbers come through. So if you see a variance here, for example, environmental stewardship, 858,000 favourable. And if you look at, so I was going through them all, page 20, you'll see that same number in the summary. And it will allow you to look underneath here. Those bar graphs are showing us the component parts of environmental stewardship, the activities that make that up, and how they are progressing in a graphical form against the budget. So I'm proposing, Chair, that I answer, perhaps highlight a couple of things on this and then move on to those.
Yep.
So in corporate, you'll notice there's a large variance, and that is general funds or investment income. So that's the large favourable income variance. And those other ones, environmental stewardship, it's around the timing and their underspend relative to budget at the 31st of December. Which comes through in the previous page and into the contractors and operational people at that point. Do we have one question?
Just how did, under regional leadership, we failed? Was that us that failed to get enough income in?
That is the timing difference around invoicing out for a partnership agreement that we have.
It's not us.
No, it's not you.
Thank you. Chairman Horrell, is this your question now?
Well, it is. I just saw somebody looking casually at that, and I thought perhaps it was shovel-ready, but that's unrealised gains in the corporate line. That's, and I was intrigued by the 5,455% variation.
There was no plan for gains.
So that's actually where the unrealised gains sitting.
So the corporate is covering off the corporate activity and general funds, which is our investment activity.
When you go down to it was an expenditure of the drop, but it was revenue. I was pretty relaxed. But so you've got 53,000.
So that's one of these consultants that we've been talking about for the LTP. Can I move on, Chair? We have significant expenditure. So this is where we're listing our government-funded projects in two groups. We have 10 contracts in climate resilience, and now I think 4 or 5 in biodiversity as a total, constantly increasing. We've turned these around. The brackets might be a little confusing. The government grant is the income from for shovel-ready. Our expenditure to the 31st of December, our expenditure for the full year, and the result is intended to be a cost to council. That's our contribution to the shovel-ready project and our contribution to the biodiversity project. As at the 31st of December, both projects are showing income received and moderate to very little expenditure at that point. So it's a surplus position at the 31st of December. Page 15. Statement of financial position is fairly standard. One note, we're noting there that in trade and other payables, we're holding that income in advance as a liability. So we've received it, it's not ours until we spend it, and that liability will fluctuate and decrease as we receive further funds. Page 16, statement.
Sorry, can I just get in there, please, Tanya? It's a modest point, but again, perhaps I'm concerned staff here employee entitlements have gone up. I suppose, actually, no, I think, sorry, no, just answer my own question, because of course it's the 31 December, so it won't take into account leave people have actually taken in January. Yeah, so we should see a correction in that balance, hopefully. Yeah, okay.
And that was quite low, to be fair. We tend to run at balance date around 1.3.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you.
Statement of cash flows, strong cash position at 31st of December. Rates and insurance monies received, rates received perhaps in a better cash flow position than we expected given the situation last year. And I'd like to carry that forward, Chair, to the cash flow report to speak to that in more detail. So the closing balance, 18.2 million, 3 million at 31st of December with reference to a cash flow that we will talk about. Clean Air reports one additional clean air loan from the two TAs that we work with. Page 18, our council activity report. So this is where we combine our inputs and our outputs, our levels of service with our financial investment and revenues in those areas. A summary, 11 on track, 7 off track. Wilma will speak to that in her detailed report. And again, reflecting just graphically where we're at versus the full financial year. Pages 19 to 21, not intending to do in detail, Chair, unless specific questions, but again, the purpose of this graph is to show us where we're on track and off track with our levels of service and where the component parts of that large activity, how they're tracking. Are they on budget, under budget? And a summary, as I said, that will refer you back to a previous page. Any questions on these 3 or 4 pages of performance monitoring?
Councillor McKellen?
Madam Chair, I'm probably a little bit surprised that we're halfway through the year and halfway through expenditure when I thought our cash flow was very summer, autumn dominant and relatively low compared to the first part of the year. These look like very similar to about halfway through, all the way through, even if they're yellow. And I always thought that we were, heavy in that latter part of the year because of a lot of the invoices didn't come through then, the work wasn't done until the summertime. So I'm a little bit surprised that some of the stuff is actually halfway through.
Yes, so we're showing an $800,000 positive variance in spending still. We do have and have had a bit of that extra work coming through in the river works, as I said, that may have been done later, and we won't be halfway, Councillor, I think, because our spending is going to be higher. So perhaps point to note here is that the graph shows expenditure on budget, not on forecast. And we might end up, the forecast is showing higher expenditure, higher income. I would also hope that maybe our phasing has got better.
That was behind my question. I would have expected these to be lower so that you saw it coming through as per what I expected the cash flow to be.
Well,
in volume.
yes.
Sorry, can I just ask one other question, please? No, sorry, let's go back to page 14. Again, I'm very appreciative of the work here. Under the major project expenditure, you raised one of the real issues with any local authority, which is projects that take more than 1 year. Obviously, when I look at if I understand correctly, the dates, the period, they reflect long-term programs. Do we have a budget for how much we anticipate to spend on these projects this year? We've got year-to-date, we've got life to date, so how much we'll spend. Do we actually have a budget of what we anticipate to spend this year?
We do, and that would be a good addition.
Yeah, thank you. It just would be helpful because otherwise we, what long-term projects like, you tend to lose track of them, and this would be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Beard?
Just a very small formatting point. In the very first of those graphical reports, we've got a table, a key as to what the blue, the orange and the grey mean. In the following on reports, that key is missing.
Yes, I accept that.
Just to fine tune that to.
As far as formatting, I've also asked Tanya to move the little numbers out of the green and blue circles in the previous pages because we can't read them.
Yes. Happy to do that, Chair.
I've got expansion on my computer.
Yeah. Anything else from those pages Tanya's just covered off?
That, Chair, is item 1.
Somebody like to move we note those, please? Thanks, Councillor McLeod, seconded Mr. Robertson. Is it that title? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Sounds like the Matrix.
Yeah.
Could be.
Oh, really? Yeah, but is he here? Tanya, we appear to have Tom Phillips, so we'll just, we'll box on, will we? Thanks.
Lloyd, thank you,
Thank you.
Councillor. Item 2, Chair,
Just one moment while we get time round the right way. Thank you.
The investment report I'd like to take as read. It is very similar to previous months, there's nothing significant in it, but we do have guests, Tom is here with his team to talk us through the current situation with our portfolio and update us with some information that he's, a very detailed report that he's given us. We are going to take that report as read and he will talk to the summary and take questions. Thank you. And welcome, Tom.
Welcome, Tom. We can't hear you though. A short report.
Can you hear me now?
Sure can. Thank you. Welcome.
Sorry, the joys of modern day communication, I still struggle. And thanks very much for the opportunity to have a chat. So we're well aware that COVID scuppered our journey down to see you last year, so we're looking forward to coming down to the OPAC at a mutually convenient time later in the year. But just, I think we've got about 15 minutes, is that right?
Yes.
So you've obviously got a copy of our performance that I've seen through. So look, in summary, for the financial year to date, the portfolio is up over 10%, which is a very strong result, particularly given what's happened with COVID. We are sitting well within all our benchmarks in terms of the SIPO limits. Currently, we're overweight growth assets, so we're sitting about 55% relative to the neutral position of 50%. And that is simply because we've got a very constructive view on growth assets or shares, equities over the year ahead. So happy to be sitting overweight so that we can try to maximise the returns for the portfolio. I might pause there and hand over to Phil, who's our strategist, just to give 5 minutes on sort of our market outlook, a little bit on the offshore, and then a particular focus on what's happening here in New Zealand, and then we'll invite questions. If that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good to talk to you again. Yeah, like Tom said, we're still constructive on equity markets globally. But clearly, the recovery from the COVID lows last year was powerful, but we think the conditions are in place for further upside. The rationale for that really is now that we're moving into a different phase here, where economic activity is likely to rebound strongly this year, driven by vaccines. And while there's clearly some uncertainty, effectiveness of vaccines to new strains, etc., which we're certainly not dismissive of that risk. What we're seeing through the rollouts and more encouraged us that yes, economies can reopen this year, and we see quite a strong recovery in corporate earnings. Together with what is still likely to be a very supportive policy backdrop, so central banks still maintain very stimulatory conditions, and in some countries, some additional stimulus. So in the US, especially, with the President additional stimulus. So strong economic growth in conjunction with kind of supportive central banks and governments is quite a powerful combination for equity markets, and we still don't believe that's fully factored markets yet. The risk to that view is I think there's two, I suppose, over the next 12 months. The first is, like I said, that vaccines prove ineffective against new strains. Look, we're not dismissive of that. We're certainly not virologists and can comment too kind of closely on that. But like I said, we're encouraged by what we're seeing around the rollouts to date. But look, clearly, if the vaccines prove less effective, that could delay the timeline of reopening. So that's something we're just monitoring. The second one is around the policy backdrop and whether it turns less stimulatory. So central banks decide that economies are growing strong enough and inflation's picking up for them to start to take away the stimulus, which could prove challenges for equities, but we think that is still a few years away yet. Central banks have said that they are more likely to err on the side of over-stimulating than under-stimulating, and inflation pressures we think that are unlikely to pick up in a sustained fashion that causes them any worries. So globally, we think that's cool. Still very supportive backdrop for equity markets. Then just briefly on the New Zealand situation, look, clearly the New Zealand economy has done remarkably well through this in an overall sense. There's clearly pockets of strain still, but overall the economy has done better than feared. What that means for our financial markets is that it significantly reduces the likelihood that the Reserve Bank needs to deliver more stimulus, I suppose, right? Which we think is a great story. And the discussion is now shifting when the Reserve Bank will need to hike. Look, we think that's still a way away. But what's, I suppose, most important for our markets here is that there are some big forces still capping term deposit rates. New Zealand retail banks have got a lot of cash. They're sitting on big deposit bases at the moment. In addition, the Reserve Bank has provided them with some very cheap funding through their funding for lending program. So it means that even if we start getting closer to the point where the Reserve Bank talks about raising the official cash rate, we think term deposit rates are likely to stay very low and capped for some time yet. And that flows on to other markets where investors just cannot get the return or the income they need from term deposit, and they're forced up the risk curve into corporate bonds and also into the equity market. So it's just this tailwind of money looking for return and income, which we think is still going to be for our markets. But I'm conscious of time, so I'm happy to pause there and open to questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have Councillor McCallum has a question to start us off.
Thank you. I'm just more interested in your view. Everybody says the economy in New Zealand has done really well considering the circumstances being thrown at it. But I was really blunt. I would say we've actually had two extremes come through, and I think those with money and strong businesses have done very well and doing well, but we've got a very big tail end, and we've got a lot of people who are worse off now. So I'm just wondering how that's going to play out going forward, and wonder whether you had a view.
Might have lost. Sorry. No, here we go. Look, I think that's a fair point to make globally. You used to hear it talked about a K-shaped kind of recovery, where you, like you say, those with jobs and typically is in certain industries have recovered strongly out of this, and then there's those that haven't. Look, that comes down to government support, and I think it's fair to say that we are likely to see ongoing government support. And I think one of the consequences of COVID is that governments are going to play a role in economies than they did pre-COVID. Obviously got debt now than they did pre-COVID, but I also think some of the policies that have been implemented, maybe more so globally, but also in New Zealand, are going to be to fully withdraw. And so I think that is absolutely right. We will see more kind of redistributive policies to try and offset some of those kind of challenges coming out of that. And like you say, it's been an uneven recovery. Like overall, the economy's done very well, way better than expected. But look, clearly some sectors and industries may never be the same as they were. So I think governments will still have a big role to play for years yet to try and offset some of those challenges and reallocate resources to other industries.
So understanding that, if I may, has our balance of investments sit well within that framework going forward?
So I think the most important thing, which I say in a lot of presentations, is that the New Zealand equity market is not the New Zealand economy. There's actually no correlation at all between earnings growth in the New Zealand market and GDP growth. Now, you can't say that in other countries. There's a closer resemblance, but it really just falls down onto the makeup and the sector composition of our equity market, where you look at the large companies. There's a couple of big international growth companies, big healthcare company, a big milk infant formula producer. Most of their earnings, in fact, all of their earnings are international. And then you have the utility sector, you have property, and you have a lot of infrastructure assets where their earnings stream is not really dependent so much on how well the economy is doing. There's some companies like the transport, tourism, there is a few names in there that are dependent on the economy, but overall, the market is quite separate by different things than how well they're doing. So what matters more really is where interest rates are going, what that does for things or dividend yields in our market, other sources of income. That's actually, I suppose, the main way it comes through. But in terms of the overall economic performance of the economy, there's not a lot of relationship.
What I perhaps that is, we've seen a global shift throughout the world, and partly as a result of COVID, and it was probably happening before, just this gap potentially between sort of the haves and the have-nots, and you see definitely a shift globally to the left on a global basis, and that may mean policy shifts over the next 3 to 5 years on a global basis. But right now it's more huge stimulus from central banks and central, without doubt, helping economies recover.
We are losing you on sorry, Chair, we are losing you several times in the conversation, so yeah, maybe can you move closer to the microphone, or if that works? We're picking up most of it, but not all of it.
Okay, try to do that.
Is that fair?
I was just about to say.
I'm taking that their portfolio split is about right for the economic platform that has been expressed to us, and there's no need to move that around. That was the answer to my question. So.
Yeah. Thanks. I've got Chairman Horrell and then Councillor Beard. Thanks.
Yes, Nigel, when you look at the benchmark, congratulations on your performance over the last 6 months, and it does tell me that the flexibility in our SIPO is working quite well. I guess just looking at medium term, around the world we've got tourism has taken a major hit. You talked about the uneven recovery, airlines, cruise ship industry. Are we likely to see some bumps in the medium term? A lot of money is flowing into the equity market and housing market on the back of very, very low returns from money in the bank.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the big medium-term question for investors, and it goes in any asset class, not just equities, but yeah, you've mentioned property there as well, is, okay, when do the conditions, like this positive narrative we talk about, strong growth, low interest rates, when does that change? And the mid-term question is, does inflation emerge enough for central banks to start to worry and have to start taking this stimulus away? So cease their asset purchases, but also start hiking interest rates. And I think we've still got a few years before we really need to worry too much, if at all, about that point. But that is the big medium-term question, which will determine asset allocation and where you'd want to be positioned. So we're just keeping a very close eye on the best we can. I think one of the good things about inflation is that it's quite of a lagging indicator. It picks up once an economies have done pretty well. So we think we'll have a bit of runway to work with and a bit of insight and foresight to know whether it's going to be enough to alter that. But I think that is the big, I suppose, fulcrum that we're watching. Does inflation turn up enough to worry central banks? If so, that would shift how we position portfolios. But we think we've got a few years.
Thank you, Councillor Beard.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. So just on the question of one other factor, obviously we've got funds invested offshore, New Zealand dollar currency. You haven't made much of an attempt, or even haven't tried to comment on currency, and I know it's in crystal ball that you always say something and it's probably going to be wrong, but do you have a view for currency through to June? We're about the government's debt rating was improved, and Kiwi lifted. So what do you see Kiwi doing by June this year?
Yeah, by June, it's all, like you say, forecasting currencies is a bit of a mug's game. But I think New Zealand dollar's bounced a lot off its lows from last year already. And I think the easy way to answer that is, one, the global economy is looking better, or at least there's an improved outlook now. So the New Zealand economy is sensitive to how well the globe does. And we also have the New Zealand economy obviously doing well as well. Now, the way the New Zealand dollar typically trades, it is quite a sensitive currency to global developments. And so if we are correct and we're in a world where we're in a reflationary world where things are improving, then it is New Zealand dollar, it benefits in that environment. But I think over the next few months, it has run aggressively. We'll see what the Reserve Bank says this afternoon, whether they highlight some concern around where it's got to. So I don't think it's going to be a smooth ride, but my gut feel is that it's likely to stay supported over the next 6 months or so, given this better global outlook and domestic outlook. That is our base case. So upside, but not a smooth ride, I suppose, is how I feel it. Against the US dollar, at least, maybe slightly different against other currencies.
So do you say a 70-75 sort of range, or do you see it dropping below 70?
It could easily drop a bit, but I think 70-75 is that's a safe range, I'd assume, for the next 6 months or so. Probably closer to 65 to 70 if I was if you had to force me to make a call, but within that range, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions for the gentleman while they're here? Excellent. Thanks very much, chaps.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to the first and later of the year.
Hope so. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Somebody like to move that we note that
Happy to
report,
move
please.
that report.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Seconded Chairman Horrell. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thanks very much. Item 3, cash.
Can I just ask one question on that foreign currency? So how do you just take their translation and it's in New Zealand dollars? So they've done the translation for us.
We have a portal available for us 24 hours a day in which we can check the valuation, and they're currently updating the market and the currency conversion.
And so in your forecast for a 2 million gain, how have you run that?
I've assumed that there may be some downward variance and just taken a conservative position. As I said, we can lose $500,000 a day. So this is, the one I've put in there is very much based on things not changing.
Or balancing.
Thank you. Right, moving to item 3, the cash forecast. Talia, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the forecast through to the 30th of June, financial year. Strong cash position, as I said, at the moment, including $4.5 million of government-funded projects, being the climate resilience and biodiversity projects. Rates received are ahead of forecast in August when we did our last projection. And we were talking about supporting ratepayers with the 3-payment plan and considering where the economy might be and the effects of what was happening last year. We took a conservative approach to forecasting rates income or rates receipts. In the end, the ability to defer the rates was taken up by 320 ratepayers, as opposed to perhaps a more significant number than we had anticipated it might. The result is that we have cash received in advance of where we thought. It's not extra cash, it's a timing thing that's come in perhaps some months before we thought. And I refer to a report later where the deferral was not significant in the end. The cash flow also suggests that we still have some insurance money to come. It's been quite a slow process going through London, which has been very stricken by their inability to process claims. Some of that, in fact, is going to be received in March, perhaps rather than April. And the last number there for the insurance claim was, we believe that we have another claim to process, and we're anticipating that again will take some time to come through. I've separated out the council cash flows from the government funded projects, as you can see. So there's a projected greater outflow from now to June than income, because we already have $4.5 million there. And those outflows are very much based on the original projections of the shovel-ready work of the capital. And what transpires there will be dependent on our ability to get that work done this summer.
Are you explaining that 1.4 million at the end, is that what you're saying? Or how are you explaining that?
Sorry, so the 1.4 is our contribution, it's our local share for the financial year.
Is it an accrual, or is it should be an accrual? How are we expected to just write a cheque for 1.4 in June? No.
I'm not trying to predict it by months. I've said that by the end of June, we will have paid 1.4 million.
So it could be a phased issue rather than.
So we will be just slightly negative in June or thereabouts, which is a couple of months later than normally. We would be looking to go into overdraft normally in April. And dare to say that our deficit, our lowest point of cash drawn, our overdraft will be some 3 million less than previous years. So instead of reaching around the 10, I'm expecting it'll be less than that. It could be less again. It's very dependent on significant cash flows here through these projects. Any questions, Chair?
No.
That's a miracle.
Well, I'm happy to move, but I think it's even though we've drawn down money, we're in the position that I hope we would be. So if you were drawing where you want the lines, this hits about the mark you want to be. So given there's some ups and downs, it's a better cash flow position than what we've had forecast other years. So in principle, it's a good plan.
Thank you, we've got a
Good position to
mover
be in.
and secretary, please. Thank you, Councillor Beard. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you very much. Item 4, the long-term plan progress report. Just before I hand over to Wilma, I'm thinking, just wanted to say well done on the introduction. Yeah, it's I think a good. Our activities in depth page is a really good explanation of much of where we're at. So thanks very much for that, Wilma. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. I can't take personal responsibility for the writing of the front page, so but I'm glad it's an improvement on what has been in the past. I'm hoping that this report will only continue to improve. So just some remarks in general about this report. There are areas that are going to be amber for the entire year, and they won't change. Those are the areas where you are seeing amber on amber already in the first 2 quarters, and there's a reason for some of those things. Can I make an observation that within many of these levels of service and targets, there are multiple targets leading to an end date. The end date is not at risk for the water and land plan or for the coastal plan, but the interim targets and the time it's taking to get through the work program reflect, I think, first of all, planning 3 years ago for what the third year of the LTP's timeframe might look like. There was certainly some COVID effect in some of this, but people, water and land in particular, the planning dates around how long it would take to get through the values and objectives and the science work was unforeseen, I think, at the time that these plans were written. So while the setting of limits, for example, in levels of service 3 are set by the 31st of December 2025, we're reporting amber because we're not meeting the other targets on the way through time-wise, but the 2025 date is not at risk. And that's, going to be the same all year because that's always going to be the case. The same for the government regulations for the NES and air quality. We are waiting an external advice on those timings, and as a result, until we know that, we're expecting the government will still want to have a fully operative plan by the 30th of June 2024, but we don't have that information yet. So I'm anticipating that we're going to continue to have an amber response right through the year. There are a couple of instances in here where I think there have been factors other than phasing and timing and planning and being year 3 of an LTP. And those relate to items 5 and 8. So I'll take item 5 first. So while I mentioned earlier, Chair, that there is a partner projects factor in here, speaking to Bruce's comment earlier, there is also a shovel-ready factor in here, which is definitely a pressure of work that's come at us now. However, it's not the primary factor. So this issue around the work for the biodiversity strategy has been ongoing, I think, in previous years. LTP's reports, we're just behind in this, and there are many other players who are also the same players who are engaged in all of the other jobs for nature, government recovery work. So that is an active piece of work, but it's going to show that we're always behind, I think, in timing for the rest of the year. In the level of service 8, this piece of work refers to staffing constraints, and that's primarily because that relates to the estuary science. We haven't replaced the estuary scientist yet, who left at the end of last year, although the organisation that she's gone to is being has been contracted for specific pieces of work to assist us. The reason that this will continue to be amber is because it relates to coastal planning work that we're doing, and the coastal plan is a year behind track. So that will continue to show as amber, I believe, for the rest of the year, because we're a year behind. We're not going to meet our 30th June deadline for that. And there is a broader piece of work underway looking at how we actually organise our science resource and its program of work, which may have an impact on us for the new financial year, but probably not on this one. So that's my commentary on those ambers. So I would expect to see all of them continue through to the end of this financial year.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. Are we trying to be too detailed in some of this work? In other words, we get ourselves bogged down because we need to know the nth detail, or do we have enough information that we can actually make some movement forward? May not have it all, but we know that action needs to be required.
So on the work, if you're referring to the work in the people, water and land space in particular, I mean, we're nearly there with all of those projects. So that are actually holding the reporting traffic lights back in amber. So I think that the pace of the project probably wasn't scoped at a pace that actually also required our partners to be on board with us for that. So there was a significant amount of work had to go into the front end of this project, and we've, I think, been very successful in having an extraordinary outcome with iwi on people, water and land, but that's taken a lot longer, I think, than we would have planned for. But I think that investment at the front end is actually going to pay dividends now for the regional forum going forward. It's provided them with a really good platform to be able to work through their work program. There's no doubt that looking forward, there's been a lot of work between policy and people, water and land on their forward program of work, and we look like we're on track for the deadline. So I think that, that was just a matter of understanding the time that it would take to get through the front end of work.
Can I follow on from all that? Can I just get a bit of clarification? Are you thinking we're too complicated? We should be 80-20 rule? And the challenge with that is, so something like limit setting or contaminant work, we do an 80-20 rule, and we'll, say actually, percent we need a significant reduction. We're going to get, we need to have it as robust as we can, otherwise we're going to get criticised. And so, we're between the devil and the deep blue sea and some of the stuff. I agree around the need for 80-20 where we can, but in some areas we're going to have to get this work as good as we can get it. That's not saying we're going to remove uncertainty, but we need to be doing the work to make sure that the peer reviews are in place, that we've gone into that extra bit of of effort to make sure we are, we're being seen to have as good a science as we possibly can.
That science needs to meet that test of the environment that is.
And also meet the needs of our partners as well, both to environment, but also our stakeholders, our communities. So, it's a tough line.
Yeah,
I'm not convincing him very much, Chair.
I might pick it up later on in the meeting, but I just asked the question because we had the combined workshops the other day. SDC have a $9 million budget to do detailed analysis on biodiversity. And we're going, well, actually, why don't we incentivise that work to be done by the landowners? And don't worry about how many insects or how many plants we've got in this area. The main thing is that this area is captured and protected. So there's a delay in gaining an objective. So I suppose what I'm saying is sometimes we do a whole lot of work internally, but we actually don't talk to the outside. Maybe the outside can help us do the work that we're trying to achieve internally. So that's what I'm trying to get at. And I think those things we don't do enough cross-contamination of what's before us. How do we actually work?
So there's a simple answer to and I'm not trying to defend STC here, even though they're a great friend and colleague in mine, but they're responding to government direction, not a government request, but a government direction. You shall go and identify your SNAs across your region to this standard. So look, we've worked hard on this to say, we don't think that's very helpful. The regional set is done. We haven't succeeded, so they were simply doing what they, not a request, but a direction. So this is one of our challenges. We're actually in the space of being a deliverer for central government. And we've got to, we're the meat and the sandwich, in this case STC is, which is great, actually. But so it's not quite as simple, with respect, Councillor, not quite as simple as
Yeah, I suppose
complicated. It's a fact that actually
in the back of my mind, we've got signs that tells us that things is bad and we haven't done a work program to come out. We just know that. I pass it every day when I go from Macquarie River, highly modified river catchment, but there's no plan in place. But it's bad. Winton Stream, really bad. There's a number of things out there that I think we've got to get to action on the ground because we're being held accountable in the public arena. And I want to pick it up in risk later on because I think the risk is that we lose our people out there. So I'm just trying to get an understanding. Is the work that we're doing actually critical, or is it I'd like to do, or are we pushed down a rabbit hole that doesn't take us anywhere and it's taken us a lot of money along the way? I have a great understanding, but we've got to get some action on the ground and some work on the ground.
Can I say the question you're asking is the question that, sorry Rob, we ask as an executive of our work programs, and that we are very actively looking at right across the organisation, but in some very specific areas of work. And so the answer to that is we are looking hard at exactly that.
and also just following on from it, hence the change in the organisation. The changes we need to make include that more outward looking, more catchment based, more outcome driven. So, integrated catchment management is going to be a key for us, and that's our future. So that's exactly what you're saying. We need to change.
I'm sure the committee will keep asking that you were asking.
That's good questions. Yeah.
Chairman Horrell and then Councillor Beard.
You just a brief comment on the traffic lights here. We're actually reporting on our last LTP, and we have talked about in the new one perhaps having more realistic goals. We actually have to report on. This is really, we said we're going to do this, how we do it, and some of those things are probably likely to change a little bit because if we set aspirational goals, we're always going to have the wrong colour.
Thank you, Councillor Beard.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So again, I'm just looking at page 39 and 3.3 performance targets. Policy and planning, this is the two ambers on air quality. And we had quite a discussion a couple of meetings back about air quality. It seems to be, I don't know, is it the orphan child? We've got focused poster on water quality, but we seem to be a little bit quiet and under-focused, I think, in the air quality space. And I think the reason why I say that is if we're going to get some progress on climate change, air quality is one of our tools that we can pressure those who need a discharge consent for their air quality, whether it be the schools, the hospitals, and the big corporates who pump out still coal and notwithstanding the households and so forth that we talked about before. But I think, when you want to comment, I know quality staff are scarce and they're probably being forced to look at other things, but I just wonder what is the focus for air quality?
So can I say that the LTP report is not the organisation's current work around its strategy. So, and as Councillor Hall says, it's, this is year 3 of an existing LTP's work program that we're reporting against. The measures associated with this that we are reporting against relate to the National Environmental Standard. And the issue that you raise is that Council has given us some direction through the LTP process currently around strategy in this space. So we need to be reflecting that in the levels of service that come forward to you next week for conversation around the LTP. And you'll see air quality is one where the levels of service will be different. There will still be a reflection of the need for us to meet the National Environmental Standard, but there will be other proposed levels of service that are not there, that are not reflected in the current LTP's levels of service that will be recommended to you that reflect your strategic conversation.
Yes. Last call for questions on that report. Thank you, Councillor McCallum. Seconded Mr. Hudson. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Wilma.
Very good.
The fleet management report.
Thank you, Chair. This is a new report from us to you regarding what's happening in our fleet space. So the report's for noting, but any feedback on that and what you'd like to see would be very welcome. As you will be aware, we implemented e-roads last year and were able to access some good data from that with respect to our fleet, with respect to emissions. That information is still forthcoming, and so we don't have any data on that for you yet, but we hope to have some in time for our next report.
Councillor McCallum.
Two things. One is we drove to the meeting the other day and this thing kept beeping in front of us on the dash.
Right.
One of the things was that the device didn't line up with the speed limit of the town or the area, and there was some distance between the two.
Yep, there's a lag.
Yep. And the other thing was, when we did have to pass a car, it did go off, but there was no other opportunity to pass it, so I just made that without any.
Yes, you get a report,
So do you have a number of conversations with staff in a similar way?
I'd like to know who was driving.
I just give you,
later.
that is a feedback, not a comment. It's just,
Yeah.
it's the first time I've been in the car with it, and we were interested to see how it went.
Yeah.
So in the defence of the driver, would say we were trying out to see how it behaved. That aside.
Do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Change subjects. I would actually like to, and I probably looked in here when I read this report, I was looking for the list of actual vehicles to see what mileage and age they were. You've got it commented here.
Yep.
And you're going to look at part of the fleet that's available. And I think I was probably from previous reports looking at what our policy was, the 4 years, 150,000, but we seem to be in this report quite comfortable going to extend out to 10 years. So they had to hit two things. One, they had to hit the 4 years and the 150, but even though some of those vehicles were quite old.
Because not all the old vehicles are, so again, it's about trying to get the right combination and prioritising those most in need.
So I was trying to balance that up, and I was trying to balance up that we internally would be looking at better efficient vehicles, so maybe more hybrids than actually electric. And I don't know, and so that was one thing. The other thing was I'm just not too sure morally, when you look at the resources that some of those vehicles pull, especially the EVs, child labour, real resources on copper and cobalt and that sort of stuff, is that really sort of the stuff that we want to get into? Because we will be challenged
with that down the track, because we don't recycle very well. So it's just, how do we actually look at this in a total global perspective? Or we're only looking at air emissions, which we can make major effects on, but globally we could be doing a backdoor impact that is actually not what we want.
I think there's an element of rock and a hard place with that as well, in terms of what is the availability of other options in that respect. In terms of the utes, for example, finding an electronic vehicle to do the job that we need those vehicles to do, or a hybrid, is incredibly difficult at the current time. Where possible, we are looking at the utilisation of vehicles and seeing where we can replace utes for perhaps SUVs or something that gives us more flexibility. The utes that we are purchasing, and in fact those that we have purchased since 2018, have been the Euro 5 emission standard. So we're doing what we can do in that space. We have yet to implement a polling system for all vehicles to make sure that we get better flexibility out of the fleet that we do have, and see if we can reduce the number of vehicles as well. And needless to say that we will constantly be looking at the options and improvements that we can be making in the efficiency and the sustainability of our fleet. But as I said, at the moment we're somewhat constrained as to what is available.
Can I just, I'm sorry, just about in there, that hybrid technology is purely transitional. That's the reality. So do we leapfrog to the future, or do we stay on the transition? And regarding CO2 into the atmosphere is far more threatening than mining lithium, or whatever it might be. So it's the net benefit that we will always go after.
Councillor Beard, you have a question?
Yeah. So just on the nature of the 3 hybrid vehicles that we have and who is currently using them, I guess allude, or I was in the car with Lloyd. I was in the back seat actually on the trip to Dunedin. I'd posed another alternative means of getting there, but it's probably a bit early to be able to use that. But at what stage would those hybrid vehicles be able to be used for that intercity sort of, or I mean, we did 500 k's probably on that trip, all petrol. But would it have been better for the pool car to have been a hybrid car for us to have used?
And I think it could have been, as far as I'm aware, those SUVs, the electric vehicles are pool cars and can be used for those sorts of purposes. Needless to say, I'm not quite sure the extent of the range and whether you get the whole way there or back in the electric vehicle, how you might manage that. But certainly the pool cars are there to be used. And actually, to come back, Councillor McCallum, to your point around the beeping of the drive buddy in the system, we have got, we are putting in place training for councillors to be able to use those systems and those processes.
So what are those hybrid vehicles?
Beg your pardon?
What are those hybrid vehicles?
They are
RAV4s.
Suzuki RAV4s. Toyota. Sorry. RAV4s.
Open road running of hybrids and petrols is not a great difference. The difference is around town running, where you have a transition from motors to electrics. But on the open road, when you're under power, it mostly runs on the engine.
Sounds like you guys run to power as well.
I think,
I'm joking.
well,
I'm joking. No, don't forget.
Thank you. We have Chairman Horan has a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. A couple of items come out of this when I look at it. We've actually reduced our total vehicles from 59 to 54, so that's good. The work on carpooling, etc., also good. I guess the one risk I do see is that under our current criteria, that 30 out of 54 vehicles are eligible for replacements. I'm assuming we're doing work on cost per kilometre, depreciation, and all those sorts of things that we aren't going to run into a brick wall. And I think my car's one of those ones that's on that list.
You're on our list, yes, you are.
On the E-rates one,
A couple of us actually.
And biker.
Stop there, Bruce, you've said enough.
Watch around that. On that E-rates thing, Neil told me that you get the warning, but if you back within line within 250 metres, I don't think it shows up on the data thing, which gave me a little bit of comfort because you do start to get perverse reactions on driving on that rather than on the road, so they don't always line up, and it might say you can do 70. There might be a restriction, but it doesn't show up. So if you're looking too much at that, you can almost get some negative stuff. But I know it's a new system. It's in progress, and will have more benefits than frustrations. But I think there are a few just. Especially if GPS isn't quite right and you've gone past the sign and you're getting a red thing.
And it is a satellite thing, there is a buffer zone on either side of, the speed limits. What we do find overall though, that through the implementation of the system, driver performance has improved significantly. Yeah.
Could just be the fact that they're being observed in a big brother kind of a way. Please let that never be me. Councillor McFarlane, do you have a question before
Yeah,
we
just
move on?
in regards, we were talking about, what I would like to see in regards to the, just actually some of the costings on the e-vehicles. We, to be honest, we're in a position where we should be probably leading a wee bit in this discussion around the emissions and all this scenario, and just see the difference in what is it going to cost. If we've got 30 vehicles coming up, well, we need to know what the figures are and the difference between the standard vehicle and the new vehicle. And if it may be part of our environmental leadership, we're saying this is, and probably as Peter said, maybe we jump to the, we've got to start thinking about that, and because it's certainly a hot debate, climate change. So if we don't see the figures, we can't make that.
Could I expand that a little bit more?
Yes.
I think it would be really interesting to take a couple of vehicles through our fleet range, whether they're combinations or utes or SUVs. How many times we actually use a deck on the back? What is the cost over a 12-month period for these vehicles compared to one to another? How many times do we use four-wheel drive? Those sorts of things, because that could actually drive the behaviour. And I've done that in my own business, and we've actually decided that some things that we thought were important aren't. And did we need manual transmissions or automatic transmissions? There are things in there that by default we assume, but when you really nut it out, we don't use it anywhere near as much as we thought for the purpose we bought it for.
Yep.
And maybe there is a different way of actually doing that whole thing. So to pick up on Jeremy's point, I think if we understood what the combination vehicles look like and actual running costs, purchase, sale, and the utes and the true SUVs, and maybe our portfolio platform looks different.
And that's part of the data that we are still working on getting, particularly looking at, we might take a ute out somewhere, but it might sit, for example. So actually getting the utilisation, as you're saying, which features of the vehicles are we using, how are we using them, and do we move to a holistic pooling model where you have a far fewer number of utes and you take it out specifically for that purpose. So absolutely, that is the purpose of collecting the further information and the reporting, analysis and operationalisation that we hope to be doing around the fleet.
So Chair, can I just, at a high level, what we're looking at is giving you a sense of here's how the fleet's changed, numbers change, what we're putting in place to improve performance. I'm getting a sense though that there's a bit of, that we need to be looking more, are we moving quickly enough into electric vehicles? I'm getting a sense of that. And are we comparing, have we got the right metrics to actually compare vehicles to help in that transition? Because it'd be really easy to get quite detailed into the operational stuff here. I think that's scratch away, but actually at a high level, what we want is a fleet that's fit for purpose, that's moving us into zero carbon, that direction of travel, and making sure that we're not left with as we're not replacing so many, so are we going to hit a brick wall in a couple of years? So making sure we've got a planned transition. So I think if I'm on track for if I'm hitting the mark, then I'll work with Amy around actually what might we bring back to you. Because I think we need to keep it at a high level, is my suggestion.
Yes, Rob, you're right, but I'd like the detail to be done somewhere and report up to us, these vehicles are X per K, those vehicles are X per K, and look at the total picture.
So again,
X per K or whatever, so somehow we need to understand, you can do it on a star, but this one is so much better than that one for a whole lot of reasons. We need to understand.
Eurostar gives us that, but let us come back so we can, I think, better describe that, because I'm not sure, I'd rather we kept at a high level. We need to give you assurance, though, that we are focused on safety and economy and all of those things, and a fit for purpose vehicle. But part of the new, what we're operating in is that transition to emissions, EV, that sort of thing, but also to make sure that we, by focusing on not replacing too many, are we going to actually hit a wall shortly? That's, I guess, is also, is our future, does that look sensible?
So, gentlemen, I know we've all got something to add, but I think we might, can I just finish, Jeremy, and then we'll see if you still need to say anything. I think one of the things that Amy asked at the beginning was what alterations to the report we would like, seeing as this is a first attempt at this kind of a report. So I'm thinking that we've had some pretty good guidance on what the committee needs to know at a higher level. Us under the assumption, I hate using that word now, that some of that background work and data is still coming for staff. So my suggestion is that perhaps one or two of us work out what actually that report might need to look like next time. Is everybody happy with that? Because clearly we need some more high-level information than what we've got. Is that okay? Jeremy, do you still need 2 seconds? 2 seconds.
When we're dealing with this, we need to, about what would it cost to have a charging, to develop a refueling kind of things. Maybe a base, there's a whole setup here.
And some more infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure maybe to be promoting this too, whether it's in different towns. And also Tesla's off the box to off the table for any chief executive.
They're down.
I love that you can cross it off your list.
I'm ready for aspirations.
Thank you, Councillor.
Star rating for safety as well on those vehicles, do we have that by summary? Are we on 5-car safety rating vehicles, or are we?
I certainly know for replacement purposes, that's where we aim. Yeah.
It's standard.
Yeah.
Chairman Horrell, are you seconding the motion that's on the table?
Add slightly to it, doesn't it?
I'm going to have to get my
From a governance
teacher voice out in a minute.
Governance level, I think we just need a report showing that we don't want to delve into management, that we're looking at all those options. In the past, we've had, about a 15% reduction on new vehicles, just making sure that, like, the transition is going to take some time, that we're doing it in a manner that is providing safe vehicles, efficient vehicles, etc. And yeah.
Thanks, yep, and any risk to us will come up in a slightly different conversation. Thanks, just as well, I'll let you have that last word, Chairman Horrell. So we have a mover and a seconder, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried, thanks very much. Right, moving swiftly on to item 6, the Civic Financial Services Statement of Intent. Very simply, I think.
Yep, this report's just for noting, just a reminder that Civic Financial Services provides KiwiSaver and Super Easy options to local government staff. We have 45 staff in the Super Easy program with about 2.5 million invested, and 73 current members of staff with 3.5 million invested in the KiwiSaver. And the high level report basically is just that they won't be paying a dividend this year, but we don't expect to receive, we don't budget to receive a dividend from them anyway. But helpfully they are reducing the management fee around the accounts for our members. Pretty much it.
I'm happy to move this, Madam Chair. Our percentage is so low, unless we have something that's really, we think we need to go forward, everything here looks like it's in order, so I'm happy to move it.
Thank you. Bruce, did you have a question?
Well, I'm happy to second that, by the way, but with a question. That's really helpful, Amy. As far as you're aware, staff are happy with, because this is our one chance to influence actually their performance, and if they're happy, I'm very comfortable to second this as well.
To be fair, I haven't had any complaints, but I haven't asked the question either, so.
I appreciate that.
Opted out if they were.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Ease of doing business with them, et cetera, and staff will have individual arrangements where they want to buy houses and bits and pieces. There's nothing there that suggests that you've heard.
Nothing, but actually, to be fair, I haven't asked the question, and it might be a good question to ask, actually.
Somewhere in the future, but I'm happy to second this.
Thank you. Moving in centre, all those in favour please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Perfect timing, Jane. Welcome, Jane. Item 7 is Regional Software Holdings Limited Annual Report to 30th of June. Jane is here to answer questions that are not of a super technical nature. Is that correct?
Yes, James, currently our acting director for RSHL, and I thought that it would be helpful to have Jane here to talk to perhaps some of the background of the activity of RSHL and the Rococo program, if you had any questions with respect to that.
Councillor McKellen.
Thank you. Jane, given our work program going forward, will this meet the needs of council? Now, when I say that is, I presume with the number of consents that we theoretically could be getting or other monitoring systems that we have, I have in my back of my mind that there'll be some sort of spreadsheet. So you'll be able to look at it from an individual basis, but there'll be such a commonality, and I'm thinking of the farm environment plans and other plans similar, that it'll be very easily to come up into district areas reporting, because unless we have that, we won't be able to find the data. And I say that because I've actually dealt as a client of ES around information, and it's been time consuming, messy, and we got down to the point of arguing over detail, which effectively was reported by our own staff. So I was trying to find a way, and is this the mechanism we're going to have better back room to show our customers we've got a well-organised, well-run, easily reported system for what is coming, including what we already have? Or is this the wrong place for that?
It's the perfect place for it. Certainly the challenges and the maturity of our data and understanding our data and process has moved a long way in the last 8 years from where we started with Iris. And the whole focus on the future is around community engagement, environmental stewardship in the regulatory space. So it's actually in everybody being on the same bus, and we're all going in the same direction, and we're all to have good, robust processes and standardisation across the sector for the entire nation, for the entire country and all regional offices. So everybody's on board so far on Iris Next Gen. There is an extensive RFP process in train right now. I've been given the documents and my pile is 2 feet high to read. There is subject matter experts from across the country involved in this project, and yes, it's all focused on that. The customer needs is absolutely number one, and ease of doing business with council is up there as well. And so there is a journey to ensure that our data aligns with all of that. So there's a 2 or 3 year journey to ensure that our back capture of our documents are complete, and so that all of that then becomes all part of this Iris Next Gen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So it's our, I guess, just following on from Jane, our internal processes need to match up with this change. And so we're doing work, we've got a significant investment in this next part of the CLTP to be doing that. Our internal processes need to be able to support our shift towards being more outward looking. And at the moment, there's a bit of work to do. And you've highlighted some of it.
So the only thing I'd say to that is sometimes we need to go to the customer to understand what they want so that we can design it. So have you got that into your scoping field?
Some of Iris, and this is what we need to link into. So the internal processes is very much along the lines of what our customers want. We need to be asking them and working with them. So it's complementary to this. So it's this.
Chairman Hurrell?
Yes, I guess my ongoing question with this is probably, it seems a bit clunky getting Iris to actually fully mesh with our systems. Do we get the support we expect and need? Logically, having a whole lot of regional councils who do the same thing makes sense, but I know it hasn't been as smooth as it could have been over the years, so are we getting there?
We are getting there, and it has been frustrating at times. Some of those, particularly the integration into our financial systems, has been tricky, but we've written integrations now that help for that process, and it's got a whole lot better than it certainly was. The integration works seamlessly with our document management system, so there are some good parts to Iris and the maturity which it's got to now. There's clearly not a lot of investment going into the current classic Iris that we're calling it, and it's all about the future of Iris Next Generation. So, and that is forefront of particularly, so I'm doing the non-functional and the capacity and capability assessments, and so that's, ensuring that we have all that integration a whole lot more seamless than what it currently is.
So this is our big collaboration. This is our big shared service. We couldn't do this on our own. So this is something that makes sense to do. And from what I understand, we've got another couple of councils looking to hop on board with us. Is that fair, Jack?
Yes, so currently there's 15 councils really engaged in this project. So, currently we've got 6 shareholder councils plus a customer, and this is looking at all 15 of them, including Bay of Plenty is looking at it closely, and the other players as well.
And Ken
is looking at this as well. Yep.
So all of the regions are aware that we've got to be doing things differently, and part of that's collaborating. With collaboration, there's a bit of frustration because actually,
It takes time.
Takes time, and we've got to give up a bit, not be quite what we think we want, whatever. So, but I think we're much more mature than we were 10 years ago when this thing started. And there's some key people driving, across the country when you look at the names. Rococo is which is a great name, isn't it? Rococo. It's a picture, sitting back in the beach somewhere. But no, it's part of this around.
Picture I had.
Hot chocolate I went to,
but how do we? So that's looking at how do we actually really make some of the shared service stuff more than just the Iris.
Yeah. The biggest challenge with a lot of these projects is, we certainly can't afford to do them on our own. That current Iris is, large numbers, and future Iris will be larger numbers, no doubt. But
the more on board, then the better off we all. I'm really positive.
And I think it's that whole greater influence to influence central government to actually, here's the data, go help yourself, rather than, every year we have to report to MFE and MPI and all those other agencies. Well, actually, here's a portal, go help yourself and get the data you need.
And not just, as well as government, also our customers, because, will have a similar experience. What does the portal look like for consenting? Should look similar with the same back ends.
Yeah, it certainly will, and that there won't be the same flexibility that we probably have now. But that's a good thing, because we have then standardisation, because flexibility comes, you know, we all then have a little tiny bit different version of the same thing, you know.
We have councillor Beard and then Mr Robertson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So just I'm on page 78, and on note 7, property, plant and equipment. So just on the holding value of the current Iris software, so are we looking at just the old version is the 4.4 million? So I see there's additions of 448,000, so we're still spending some money on it, and depreciations of 874,000.
So there's a bit, oh sorry.
It might be Tania that might be able to answer this question. From a carrying value, we're amortising this thing over, well, it won't even be in 5 years when we've written off the current version of Iris. So is that the time frame before we will see the new version? When will the old version become obsolete and have to be then junked?
So the current version had a lifespan of 10 years, which time is up in 2023. And so there's a current discussion over how we're going to actually write this off in each council's books. We are a 15% shareholder in this, so we've only got a 15% of this total value. And it is anticipated that the new version of Iris will be available in 2 to 3 years' time.
So we might have to accelerate the write-off of what's still amortised, what's still capitalised.
And they can't take all councils all it, so there'll be a journey over 2 to 5 to 6 years of, you know, everybody migrating to the new version.
Thank you, Ms Robertson.
Yeah, look, just Jane, Rococo, which you already mentioned, Rob, which interested me, and I'm looking at page 66. Sorry, we're going backwards here, given Alan had us further down. I just noticed that it said, I'll pick this up correctly, and it's in agreement with the sector. They're looking at sector work programs for funding, management, procurement and payment and outcome tracking. We've done a lot of that already this morning. Is this affecting us?
Sorry, Bruce, who is that?
On page 60, 66 of our agenda, page 5 of the report, you can see in the middle of the page there it says, and I think it's in relationship to Rococo, they have an agreement with the sector to assist with the management that are those three things. I'm really asking them what, I take it we're a partner in that, may not be, but I presume we are. In what way will that affect us, because that's core day-to-day operations?
Yeah, so we've been contributing to different projects for a number of years, and what they've done is consolidated all those projects so that they all come through into the Rococo as one. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different projects on the go, and everybody has a contributing, sorry, I haven't got that figure with me, a contributing amount every year. And again, it's done on that 15% percentage.
No trouble with what, you know, the number of projects we're contributing to. What I'm trying to understand is what is the outcome for us? Does this mean that we're across the region, because we're working collaboratively, we'll have a standardised procurement and payment process?
Yes. Yeah.
It does? It means we'll standardise with the rest of the region. Does that, I don't know what the time...
For those projects that are under Rococo.
Yeah, no, I understand that. No, that's fine. So that's understand that. It's great. I guess my question would be that again means we're standardising. That must be part of our LTP discussion in terms of the cost of the culture change and moving to a standardised procurement payment process. It's fundamental for how we operate. Correct? Yeah.
So this is something that we've got to bring in and make sure it's visible in there.
Yeah, but yes, we'll need some investment money. It's effectively what I'm saying, Rob, here to get this into our organisation as well.
For the next gen, yes. For the Rococo projects, that is already in there.
That's in the transformational investment that's reflected in the budget.
Okay, brilliant. No, that's fine. Thank you.
Chairman Horrell?
You just at the bottom of that page, I guess it's a bit of a risk concern that the depreciation value of the Iris product, and reinvestment is not continuing at sufficient levels. You know, I guess I've always had a wee bit of a bugbear that we've got shareholders and now others coming on board. Are they paying for some of this? Because great to have everybody coming on board, but it would also be good to make sure that there is a commensurate financial cost because we're developing it. And just everybody co-signing on the original.
Yeah. So Iris Classic has the 6 shareholders with 1 customer, so Hawke's Bay contributes to current Classic Iris. And there's a discussion, we've got a board meeting tomorrow, and so there's discussion about how that bringing on new customers, how that shareholding will actually be redivided and whether an additional entity will be actually formed to cover off the new next generation or whether it'll be all just merged into the current RSHL with a shift in the shareholdings. Because certainly some of those bigger councils certainly want to have shareholdings at the table and certainly want to have a voice.
Sorry, can I just you've got your opinion? You've got your audit opinion now? Your unaudited financial statements.
Can I get back to you on that, Bruce? I'm not sure if there has been.
Any questions? If not, somebody like to move, please.
Move.
Noel, seconded. Mr Robertson, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thanks very much, Jane. We will move swiftly on to item 8. Thank you. The annual activity plan.
Just for noting, are there any comments?
Apparently not. Somebody like to move there?
Turn the page.
Page 88, 89. I'll need to find it. I'll need to find out about that.
I'm just asking about the DROS report because there's obviously been some stuff happening and there's not a schedule for a report. There's a space, but no. Just can't see what it might be.
It was normally verbal, weren't you?
Yeah.
And because the public statement, we can take it that there's progress being made, so up until now.
Schedule another update
Schedule an update on.
Public excluded acts next time. Anything else? Oh, I'll move that. Somebody said yes. Thank you, Bruce. All those in favour, please say aye. Yes, carried. It's my intention to complete the public excluded section before we finish, rather than break for lunch and then come back. So that's all right with everybody, that's what we will do. The reasons for moving into public excluded are
to enable any local authority holding information to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities, to prevent the disclosure or use of information for improper gain or advantage, and to protect the privacy of natural persons, including that of deceased and natural persons.
Thank you, Mel.
I'll move the public excluded, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Horrell, seconded